Next up for us is Amy Hayes. Amy will be talking about generational intelligence, why we don't all think alike. Give a little background, Amy. She directs and manages the adult outreach and education programming for Noble Research Institute. Noble's adult education programming provides producers guidance and proven ideas for regenerative ranching and grazing livestock with producer profitability. Noble Learning includes outreach, demonstration, workshops, and distance resources. Hayes specializes in designing adaptive learning environments, generational learning styles, competency-based programming, program evaluation, non-formal educational engagement, distance education design practices, group facilitation, and digital learners. She joined the Noble Research Institute in 2015 after serving a combined 21 years at the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension and the Texas Parks and Wildlife. Amy is a graduate of Texas A&M University with a bachelor's in wildlife and fisheries science and a master's in rangeland ecology and management. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here. All right. So I think we'll just start. That was a great introduction. You probably are wondering why a wildlife and a rangeland ecologist is talking to you today. I do run the adult education program here at Noble Research Institute. And one of the things that Stacy had asked me to talk about today is something called generational intelligence. And more specifically, we're going to concentrate just real briefly on generational intelligence and how it has to do with environmental ethos and programming. Because one of the things that people really seem to go through is when we're talking about conservation, or we're talking to our audiences, or even when you're dealing in your office, that sometimes what we want to say is not always what people hear. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and really get down into why that might be the case, especially when it matters about talking about things that matter in conservation. In your case, in water conservation, whether that's educational programming or even just working with your client, helping them get through things, introducing new things or messaging. So I think we'll just go through that. And then if we could do the first poll, there's a little poll. I want to find out a little bit about you. So just tell me, if you real quick, what your year is that you're born. Okay, I've had a chance to fill that out. Let's share that. Let's see what we've got in the audience. So most of you are born between 1981 and 1996. Okay, great. That helps me a lot. Okay, so let's go ahead and start then. So most of us, I don't know if you feel this way, but this is most of the time what people tell me when I try to talk about what we do. They're like, why does anything you do matters? And maybe some of you today, kind of, if you work on that client side, or people in your office, this is what you may be looking like. So this is why I talk about this a little bit. And a lot of times we feel like this is not necessarily, we think this isn't, we think this is their problem. This is because they aren't hearing what we're saying. Or maybe you have a program or an outreach program, or you have some kind of client-based program and you're not getting the results you need. This is the blank stares, the dead looks, the walk away that you might get. So we're going to go over a little bit what this may be caused by. Why is generational intelligence even in this conversation? Is because the reason people think differently may actually not be because they are different. A lot of this over time is how people actually problem solve. And generational intelligence is understanding that different generations actually approach problems differently, and they have different expectations about how they want you to solve their problems. They also have different ways in which they communicate, different ways that they expect. And it's not necessarily about, is this person, they don't do things because they're old, or they do these things differently because they're young. It's really about how generations look at problem solving, and then what effects in their life, in that generation's life, helps them learn. So I'm going to quickly go through that and then relate it to the environmental and the conservation story. Because as we move forward in promoting things that build conservation ethics, we need to be really careful that we're reaching everybody. And that's really what it's about. It is very much in your toolbox, just like emotional intelligence and workplace intelligence, things that you might actually use every single day to navigate either your work or your family or the people you work with. And if that doesn't convince you, the last part of this is it's actually magical. So there are a few people that have tried this and they're like, wow, that's really magic. And it really is. I'm not kidding. So we'll talk about that. If you have any questions, if this intrigues you and you say, are you the expert? I'm not the expert. I'm just someone who deployed the tool. And it's worked really well for me in my career. But if you want to learn more, there are experts, and this is one of them that you can look up. This is Amy Lynch, and there's her website. And I want you to know, just as we go through this and we talk about this, is that you can screenshot, you can take notes, but if you want to know more about it, this is already up on SlideShare. And I beg, borrow, and steal like an artist. Most of the information you see here is from other sources that you can look more in depth into and get information on. So if you're worried about taking prolific notes, I hope I just relieved you of that problem. All right, so if you'll go ahead then, we got what your age is. Now can you go ahead and pop up what generation, the second question, what generation do you consider yourself to be? And if you hate them all, I'm sorry, you're in one or the other. Okay, so well, look, most of you can, okay, so interestingly enough, this follows most of the time what you were born in, but not always what you feel like. So the results are most of you in this room are millennials and Gen Xers. It's a little bit different than the birth year that you might have been born in, and that's okay. We'll talk about that for a moment, but this will help us as we go through. So if you look in general, you're gonna love or hate this. This is going to tell you in general what your birth year what generation it puts you in. And most people hate and think, man, I don't want to be in that millennial generation. And millennials, you're either right now going, yeah, we're here, or you're like, no, don't call me that. The good news is that the next generation after millennials, everybody hates the youngest generation. The next generation after millennials, everybody's going to hate them too. And so everybody will get their fair share in the limelight. Currently, my Generation Z children are busy calling people boomers as an insult. So I feel like boomers are probably going to be getting theirs. They call anybody who doesn't think like they do a boomer, whether it's their best friend or somebody else. So everybody gets their chance to be in the spotlight, and everybody gets their chance to be in the hated light. So that's the good and the bad news for today. So I want to tell you just briefly about generations, because we really need to move into the environmental ethos part of this. What a generation really is it's not a set number of years every generation is born. It's actually born around the same time and the same place. And generations tend to have a lot of things in common. And this is people who are having these things in common before the age of 25, usually. So you're looking at people who grow up, and what they have in common is how they were parented, the method of parenting, some technology that's on the scene, and some economics. So they'll have these similarities in their environment as they grow up on a pretty large scale. So most of the time we look at generations as something national. Most of the time, national trending is pretty much what goes on, although our latest generation may actually be a global trending one. That'll be interesting. But if you look at a generation and you think about yourself, most of the time, what you have in a generation is they have a commonality between something that happens. There's a tragedy. It's marked by the beginning of a tragedy. And so usually generations emerge when something tragic happens. And it's on a national or global scale. So you can think of things like, for the United States, wars, Kennedy assassinations, can be massive changes in politics, things like characteristics of bombings, things like that. So some tragedy happens. As a society, they deal with that. So this is the recovery. The society says, this is the problem. This is what happened. It could be giant economic depression. This is how we go through it. We move through it through implementing these thinking strategies toward recovery. And you'll see them reverberating. It changes how people parent, changes what technology emerges, changes the economy. So that tragedy has a pretty big impact on what's going on. They go through a period then of recovery. These thinking are put into action. You get this period of recovery. They usually have something inspirational that happens that they can all relate to. Great things that happen. Man on the moon, the invention of a computer, things that are socially inspirational. And then they go through this period of stability again, and it can be relative. And then another tragedy happens, and that's about when another generation is started. All the things when they're growing up are usually related to that. So you can see it pretty easily in the generations. So why is that even important? And why is it important in outreach and education and communication and marketing? It's because the way we're brought up changes how we respond to challenges. So an example in my lifetime is that in my lifetime, the big technology advancement was a computer. And so everything that was in my generation is all about going to the computer to find the information, right? So we respond to challenges. Somebody said, you have a question, you have a problem, you go to the technology, you go to the computer, and then it became go to the internet. So what do we have expectations of? Well, we, as my generation, I expect things to be delivered to me through technology, because when there was a problem in my classroom, somebody didn't say, go to the library, go look that up on the in an encyclopedia. They said, go look it up online. So there's a lot of influences that make us respond to challenges, and that's very generational. Makes us respond to authority differently. What was going on in which was important? Was it important to be together hearing something? It was important to have a lot of individuality. That changes how we respond to that. Makes us act differently, even as a group. And then we have all these different motivations for action. And that's really, really important in the conservation world, is what's going to motivate people to make conservation changes. You really need to go back and look at, as a group, how do they look at conservation? How did they grow up looking at conservation? What lessons are there that taught them how to make an environmental ethos? And then most importantly, we learn differently. Everybody on this webinar, guess what? You learn differently. And a lot of it has to do with how you grew up, how you are expected to learn in the classroom, and how you are expected to learn at home. And those things reverberate through your lifetime. So does that even exist? Absolutely. Think about something here. If you're, if you can relate to life in any of these things, if you say, oh, that's how I approach life, you're in a different generation. You might think you will probably think two of these are horrible and one of them is relatable. Okay. Same here. This is very common. If things in common that you say, well, that's my life, or I understand that. Several of you you're a lot of millennials. The Office, you may use those in conversation. For me, I'm Gen X. I'm gonna relate to Seinfeld. Boomers might relate to Cheers. All the things around you culturally, some of them are actually reverberated generationally in things that we read and we see, and the art. All of those things are generational. So once you begin to understand generations, you begin to look at, why do we think differently? Why do we do things differently? It reverberates through lots of different places. So if you want to just get a quick snapshot, this is a quick snapshot that I like to bring up about why generations are so different. And if the only thing that you get across here is, as you read across through different generations, all you do is you see there are different things. There are different ways that they're called. There's different years on their cultural ethos. Look at that. If you look at nothing else, look at the cultural ethos, right? So you can see that this part of this is there's differences in these generations, moving from uncertainty to prosperity to disillusionment to social responsibility. We don't have Gen Z on here, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But the other thing is, look at the different things between the bottom section as well, and that's their outlook, right? So they have different ways that they have an outlook as well. So there are lots of different things that are going on in this particular generational differences. Another example, this is up here so that you can see, are we different? We're vastly different in our generations. And if I can point out a little bit, if you are trying to help people understand how to learn things, look at learner style. So this says that these generations learn best in different ways. Learning style we're most familiar with and we happen to actually use quite often is really for people who are the silent, greatest, traditionalist generations. They like classroom learning. Boomers facilitated, right? Learning in a group, a small group. But people like me, Gen Xers, are independent a little bit more. They want independent learners. And why? Because when I had a question, guess what? They said, go look it up, go to the library. There's a lot of rationale behind that. Gen Yers, or these are millennials, collaborative and network. They were asked to do things in group, find group solutions, work with a group, learn how to work as a team. Think about all the ways that when you grew up and went to school or were on your, maybe in college, you were told to learn, taught to learn. Okay, so everything is a little bit different in these type of generational challenges. The other thing is you can look at anything. You can look at leadership style. How do they like to be led? Some people like to be told to do it because this is what has worked best. Some people are independent learners. They want to just learn on their own. Some people need a coach, and some people need someone standing side by side with them, not coaching them, but actually being a partner in the problem solving. So think about this as you go along with what you do in your job. How am I going to reach a different generation? Am I going to tell them, show them? Am I going to come up side by side by making changes with them? So how does that work? We're going to concentrate a little bit on the first part of the cultural ethos. I'm going to go over this so that we can move to the environmental ethos. So what about these generations that look different? Well, the reason why they look different is because the way, again, that they grew up. So the traditionalists and the silent generation, the greatest generation, they grew up with a lot of uncertainty. This particular generation actually experienced multiple wars, multiple ways in which they approached problem solving. And the way that they approached problem solving for all this uncertainty was conformity as a nation. So how did they solve great challenges of the problem of World War I or World War II? Is they created things like factory working, where everyone worked together to solve a problem. Think about vaccinations, things that came up during this time. Everybody had to do their part and work together for a greater solution. So they are a generation who grew up with a lot of uncertainty. That's their tragedies. In order to move through those tragedies, they conformed. They made lots of conforming things. If you think about building of dams, the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, everybody needed to do their part together to get them out of there. And they're a very practical generation. So they just wanted to know what to do and how to do it. Okay. So what came next after this Together We Can generation? We have a counterculture. Boomer, this is your culture. This says what happened after that is we had, after coming out of World War II, guess what we had? We had a great prosperity, right? So these are kids who are growing up with urban homes. These are people who are having their own bedrooms. Every car has a house. Maybe every car has every house has a TV. We begin to see a lot of things that prosperity brings. And also, though, however, having parents who were so conforming, this generation is a lot of counterculture. And you'll notice it is a generation that wanted to, everybody was an individual. And even the politics recognized that at the time. The whole strive was for individuality, for people to do things on their own, to stand up for what they believed in, to go against the grain, to be a unique individual, right? And the United States was busy doing that on the forefront too. We were going to be the head of everything. So this generation grew up, compared to the previous, let me flip back to that. Previous generation, uncertain, lots of conformity, but very practical. The next generation, very prosperous, but counterculture. Everybody's individual, but very optimistic. They had a lot of good things that happened in their lifetime that were very much toward prosperity and very much toward we can do things. So this is a generation of the I cans. Yep, if you need something done, I can do it. The previous generation, together, we can. This generation, individuals, I can. So does that make a difference? It does in the solutions. It does the way we talk to them, it does the way that we deal our messaging to them, and it certainly does in our programming. So next came my generation. This is the Generation X. Look at this. Look at things that they were in a bunch of, they are categorized by disillusionment. The previous generation had a lot of things going right. This generation has a lot of things not going right. Massive depression, a pretty serious war that was entering into possible conflicts that included nuclear destruction. So it wasn't just that people were going to fight and a lot of people were going to be hurt. It was just pretty much end of times. It was a lot from 1970 to 1999, the end of the world. It's all about end of times. And so this particular generation is pretty disillusioned. At the same time, this is a generation when information was becoming vastly available. So they're a very skeptical generation because bad things were happening. And unfortunately, information made it so that you could see those bad things often. And through now, lots of different ways, not just through your TV, but through your computer. And you were informed of things. So this generation has a lot of disillusionment. They're very skeptical. If you have something you want them to do, you better be able to prove it. And so this generation wants to see the data because guess what? When they had a question, they were told to go look it up. Go look it up on the computer. Go look it up on your phone. Go look it up. Everywhere you go look for the data. So when you deal with this generation, they're actually going to ask you things like, well, can you prove that? Sometimes if you're right here, right now, you're going to probably be asking me in this particular presentation, well, what are the numbers on that? So in our generation, we even in our mind begin to ask that. I love the questions from the previous about gallons. We're going to ask for the data, right? All the time. What's going on? Show me, prove it to me. How many people? What size is the problem? How much of a problem is it? What's the comparison of what it was before? So this generation wants a lot of information. And I'm spending a little time on it in the next two generations because these are the clients you're dealing with coming up. And the hardest part a lot of times for people of the Gen X, which is a lot of this crowd, and millennials, is that the other things in their life don't match up. So if I want to conserve water, I want to know how much water and what data shows me that's the best way. Now, I love the portal idea because guess what? I can now manage my life with data. And this is a good thing. That's a great thing to do. Okay, next, millennial generation. This is the generation that everybody loves to hate currently, but it's a really interesting generation. Look at what characterizes them. You just had a generation that was totally disillusioned and that runs on just straight up information. This generation has a total global aspect view, and they are socially responsible, and which seems shocking to some of us on the scene. Socially responsible, but they actually are. They ask questions about how will things affect society? What's my role in that? What am I supposed to do about that problem? So they have a lot of social responsibility. And oddly enough, after growing up, and this is the characterizer tragedy is 9/11, they're actually a very hopeful generation. And it's possible because everybody said after 9/11, the reality was when somebody said, well, what's next? They said, I don't know, but we're going to move on. We're going to just get through it. We're going to all move on. Nobody had a great answer for them on how, but everybody was really hopeful. So this generation grew up out of that tragedy. The way they problem solved was they had a lot of hope. They said the world helped them out of that tragedy, right? People came to the scene. So they're a really interesting generation. But think about them and their technology, customization. And so again, I'm going back to the presentations previous to this. Think about what people want. Why do they want customization? Because they grew up with it. When they need something, they want to have it in their hands, and they want to have it customizable. If I want to see my data in a certain way that's going to help me do something, you better be providing that. And so we struggle with that, right? Because maybe in our organizations, we just say it's too hard. It's too hard to do all this data and tools. And it just seems crazy. Everybody wants an app. And yet, when we want to problem solve this generation, we say, hey, we're not going to give you an app to do that. We're not going to let you have the data. We're just going to say you should feel like changing your behavior. So generations, they begin to matter a lot. This generation, millennials, aren't just asking for what choices do I have? What's the data show? They want to know what the best choice is. They're socially responsible. They have a global view. They're very hopeful. They want to do the best thing that they can do. And they ask you things. They want to know what's the best thing to do, not just the list of options, but what's the best thing to do. And then we finally get to define a little bit, believe it or not, we actually get to define Generation Z. And Generation Z is defined by some pretty amazing things, right? They got to see a diversity in our presidency. They've got devices or technology. They just didn't have a smartphone. Now they have smart devices. Their games don't even come with instructions because they can get in the crowd and look those up. And up until last year, we were looking for their great tragedy. The thing that will define their generation is usually a tragedy. And guess what? We found it. Guess we asked for it. This generation is going to be defined by the coronavirus. Things that will happen for them are because people will move through this tragedy differently. And most of you as adults are now witnessing this. Look at all the changes that have happened because of this great tragedy. They are going to be more apt to do things through this video. They're going to learn how to do things differently because of what happened in this great tragedy. So how does that play out? They are going to look, and you can see it. Why? Because look at our great tragedy. We asked people not to just do a good thing, but the most good thing. Not just one thing, but the most good. So they're going to be asking you for the solution, the most good. Not just the best choice, but the most good. Matter is the conservation ethos. We are actually going to talk about this for just 2 minutes because that's all it'll take. You get it now. But where do people's conservation ethos comes from? The same place that their ethos, the generation they were born in. So this is the deal. So silent generation is this conformity that they want to do. Their conservation ethos says, what can we do to get, and together we'll do it. Okay, we'll do what others want to do. We'll build the dams, we'll build the systems, we'll do things together. We just need to know how we do that together. That generation, is exiting the scene. Next generation, the boomers, they want to know what's the right thing to do. If we're going to save the planet, what's the right thing to do that's going to empower the most people, and what can I do to do that? What's my role in conservation? What's my role in conservation? Okay. What does a Generation Xer? What does the data show? What does the data show? Give me data. If you want me to make a decision, let me see the data. And then I need to know how to interpret it, and I'm going to do what the data has. If you don't have data to support what I should be doing, don't even bother me. Don't bother me with your moji, everybody hold hands, kumbaya. Just give me the data. We're talking about millennials. They want to know what's best. What's going to be the best solution? Don't say all these things are good solutions. Just tell me what's the best, and I'm going to get to work on the best solution. I'm hopeful. I think that's what'll work. I'm going for the best way to solve things. If there's 2 ways that you want me to conserve water, tell me which way is the best, and I'm going to really focus on that. And then finally, your Gen Zers, these are the newest generation. They want to know what's most helpful, what's going to last in the long run. What are we going to do that makes a difference to the most people in the long run? And so you can motivate them different. So how does that look in life? For real life? Well, I'm the education manager, and my job is to create programs that reach multiple generations. And this is just an example. Our job is regenerative ranching here. And if I was Nike, I would just have this great byline that said, just do it. And everyone on the planet would think that they could do that. But even Nike has to consider that this is not the best option for them. And so this is how I look at my messaging and my education and my outreach, right? I'm going back to my generational intelligence, and I'm saying things like, for those of you, this is my boomers, this is the right choice. You know, this is the right way to do things, and we're going to do it. Okay, for my Gen Xers, I'm going to have to give them some data. Why would you ever do regenerative ranching? Because simply put, you want to reduce your cost from 30% to 12%. I'm going to help you do that. For my millennials, I'm like, you know what? We looked at conservation tillage. We looked at conventional agriculture, and you know what? Regenerative ranching is the best offer. That's the best offer for your operation. That's just going to be the best principles and practices, the best way that you can do stuff. And then for my Gen Zers, I say you get into regenerative ranching because what you're doing today is going to help improve that soil for generations to come. And if you want to be the most helpful, this is the way that you're going to do it, not just for you, but for other people. So all of my programming begins to look a little bit different when I pay attention to generational intelligence and then apply it to my conservation ethos. So that, if anything today, if you take home something, if this is a screenshot, if you take a picture, if this is what you write down, if you begin to change your language and the way that you think to reach different generations, the tools that you provide, the customer service, the way you work inside your offices, this is a synopsis of what will help you get you there, because you'll be heard, because that's the way, one of the ways that we learn is hearing in a way that problem solves for us based on the generation that we grew up in and based on the way that we were taught to problem solve. So with that, I'm going to tell you that if you're looking for some additional resources, this presentation's on SlideShare. And then also, if you're kitschy and weird like me, I keep a lot of this stuff on Pinterest. And if you don't even know what that is, it's okay. That's for other people. And if you need to get a hold of me in these spaces, you can. So I'm going to turn it back over to the moderators in case we have any questions. I know we're right on lunchtime. So Jennifer, I'm going to let you lead that and tell us what you want to do.
Great. So thank you so much, Amy. That was really interesting. And I loved narration and agreeing with and disagreeing with parts of it. And so that's always fun to see. So folks, we are just a little bit over time. So we're going to have to Amy may be able to stay and answer a few questions, but we're going to go ahead and cut it off for folks. We will be meeting tomorrow at 9:30. We're going to get started right away again with Dr. Robert Mace. We have a very full agenda tomorrow, so we're going to dispense with a lot of the preambles tomorrow and jump right in. So make sure and be there. Stacy just posted some information about the evaluation form, and Amy has let us know she can hang out for a minute to answer some questions. And then last but not least, I want to thank all the planning team and the moderators and our sponsors for this symposium. And then we'll see those of you tomorrow, and we'll go ahead and do a little Q&A here with Amy. Amy, thank you so much. That was really interesting. This first question, I don't even know how to say it, which means that I'm not this generation. Can you see the Q&A?
Why are the Xennials the best? That was the one, the Xennials, the Xennial generation the best. Now I have to ask, because this anonymous attendee will tell us, Xennial sometimes is the generation that sometimes they put between millennials and Gen X. And so that could be what they mean. So I would have to clarify potentially with that attendee if they meant that. The other thing is, if that is also validation. There is not a millennial that's a bridging generation. So why are they the best? Is because they encompass both of those two worlds. They want the data. They don't want to whine about it. They just want to, which is what they say millennials do. Aaron says we use the term elder millennials. Oh, in our circles. So sweet, right? That's a passive aggressive. But they are supposedly embracing the best of the two worlds, but not the worst of millennials, which is what they like. And as a Gen Xer, I'm cynical.
That was awesome and labeled herself as an elder millennial. Wow, I've actually heard that. I would never call somebody that if they can call themselves that.
So John asked, what are some of the key words? And so hopefully that last chart left you with some of the key words. Let me share that real quick. I'll share that so you can see it real fast. So you can see the last one here, John, because I think if you could take home those words, this is the words. When you talk to somebody, you can say, hey, together we're going to solve this problem. Or, hey, Joe, I know you can help me with this. You specifically say, I know you can do it. If you're working with Gen Xers, you say, here, I'm going to give you the data so that you can see what's the best solution. You're going to tell them that's what you're going to do. Millennials, they'll say, yep, this is the best choice. I mean, we had a lot of choices, but this is the best choice. And then my Gen Zers, I say, you know what? If you do this, this is going to be the most good. And so I use that pretty quickly, John, in conversation. I try to remember to do it in the things I print. When I post things on Facebook, I can get a lot of bang for my buck. I can post 5 different messages to different generations on a single thing. And it all looks different because it calls to different generations in the wording. Nobody even knows it's meant to be for a different generation. They just think it's a totally different answer. So that's one way, John, I would use the keywords and terms in messaging.
So Amy, if somebody wants to see you use your messaging in action, a Facebook page or I guess I would look at
I probably, when I use my LinkedIn, when I post on my LinkedIn, I'm telling you all my secrets. If you post on LinkedIn, and when I post on LinkedIn, I'm posting to different generations usually, and I'm using context. I may actually in my LinkedIn post to multiple generations in one calling. So that's how I would say is a good example. The other way, you will see things from Noble that are inherently built in because our staff is using this as well. So explicitly, maybe some of those publications and the linked into the chat, yeah, I can do that for sure, would probably be the places where I'd say you might witness that conversation. It's a little bit underground, I guess. People would say in that case.
Of where folks don't know that they're being talked to directly, like targeted by their generation or whatever. So this would be good. Folks can check out your LinkedIn to see some examples and look at some stuff from a Noble Research Institute. It's just nice to see it in practice a little bit.
Yeah, and it's like speaking in tongues because you may not actually know that you're interpreting it because we're purposely trying to put it in that way.
All right, here's one more question, Amy, and then we'll conclude after that.
Okay, do boomers and silent generations respond positively to online outreach? That's a great question because the general assumption is that boomers hate technology, but that's actually, yes, they do respond positively to online outreach, but the tool matters. So the Pew Research Institute, and I'll put it here, if you are interested about how researching how different generations use which tools, it's really critical you use the tool that responds to the generation. So for a boomer, would I start a Snapchat channel? Would I do a TikTok? They would be like, no, I'm not there. They might be at Facebook. Why are they in Facebook? Because all their kids said, if you ever want to see your grandkids in pictures, I'm not sending them to you in the mail. You will get a Facebook account so that I can share pictures of your grandchildren with you. So yes, boomers actually respond really well to positive to online outreach, but you may have to just put it in the right tool for them. And the silent, you might just go ahead and help them use to get a smartphone. That's probably the best tool that you might use with them.
Great. Amy, thank you so much. That was really interesting. Definitely a lot to think about. I hope all of the water conservation and communication folks and everyone, I mean, it can help us in our just regular life too. I definitely send pictures of my kid to the grandma and great grandma through a family Facebook chat.
You held them hostage, so, Jennifer. You held them hostage to the technology and they respond.
I didn't even set it up. Someone else did, but that's how we do it now. So, but thank you so much. And we'll see everybody tomorrow at 9:30 for another round, and have a great day, everybody.
Okay. Thank you guys.